convene. We're on item number 8. Who's reporting on that? Oh, is it James?
I'll hand over to Gavin, Chair.
Morning, committee members. Item 8. This report provides an outline of some indicative next steps associated with this new project that the committee and council has agreed to, and that's preparation of a plan change to regulate or prohibit oil and gas activities. And in particular, prohibition of oil and gas activities is couched by that prior council agreement to be within productive aquifers, aquifer recharge zones and surface water bodies. So, as you'll appreciate, this is a new plan change project. It wasn't on the council's books previously. It certainly wasn't anticipated for staff resourcing demands, so it's taken a little bit longer than ideal to get underway, but staff have done some preliminary thinking. We've scoped out some indicative timelines as sort of set out in table 1 in this paper, and we've also got some legal questions underway through Simpson Grierson in Wellington. The Wellington office is looking at the scope of a prohibition, whether a prohibition in one form or another is justifiable, robust, defensible under RMA tests and whatnot. So this paper for now is just an indicative outline of the next steps. A fuller paper is intended to be brought to this committee meeting on the 1st of March, and that March paper will certainly present some of the key findings from the legal advice we're seeking currently, and also a more fuller work program associated with the development of this plan change. One of the questions already emerging from the lawyers is some clarification around what are the oil and gas activities that this council would like to prohibit, and it's a fairly valid question in my view. For example, are we looking at prohibiting seismic surveying activities that are associated with oil and gas activities? And on the other hand, seismic surveying activities undertaken by an infrastructure provider building a bridge over a river, what's the difference? So these sorts of questions will need to be teased out and evaluated as we go through analysis of options and drafting of this plan change in the coming months. That's just one example. Another example of possible questions is, given the comments that this committee and council has made previously on the New Zealand Petroleum and Minerals block offers, the offshore ones in particular, whether or not this plan change could, should, might extend to prohibit oil and gas activities in the coastal marine area. The council's prior agreement didn't mention that, but it's quite likely or possible that submissions might, in due course, make such a request that the prohibition also extends to all or parts of the coastal marine area. So the legal advice that's on the go at the moment is considering some of these issues, and again we'll report these sorts of matters through in further detail at the meeting on the 1st of March.
Through you, Chair. Gavin, I appreciate that this was not something that was in the time schedule for staff work program, and I appreciate the time frames, the indicative timing that you put out here. It means to me that means that things are progressing, which is I'm really pleased to see. But my question is, you raised the question about the extension of this moratorium or ban out to the 12-mile limit. Can I suggest that's a really good question to get an answer to come back, our legal opinion on, to come back to this committee or wherever it has to come back to, because I am positive that there will be people that will be submitting along those lines.
Yeah,
Kia ora. Just with regard to the legal advice being sought and the proposed advice to be given at the March meeting, would the council, can they give any assurances that that information will be shared with the RPC in its entirety?
Apologies if I made reference to bringing it back to council. I mean, the advice and the fuller work program around development of this plan change will be brought back to this committee meeting on the 1st of March in the first instance. Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Number 8 refers to the work program proposing incorporation of a small number of other amendments. My recollection of those had to do with the parliamentary commissioner originally proposed things like public notification, consolidation, things of that sort. Is that what we're talking about here? And would those be identified in your March paper?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Gev, for that presentation. Was good, mate. From a iwi's point of view, through Mahia, Whakaki, right to the areas of interest of Tātou, we are, anything that happens on land regarding any prohibition for oil and gas should be out in the moana too, because why try and say that our recognition under Taku Moana claims extends out to the 12-mile radius in that area. And what I'm saying there's a lot of activity happening out there, but sometimes we get sidetracked to what's happening inland. And iwi, from our end, will be very against this happening, as because of the resources of what we have and the amount of public that use that area of Mahia, extending right through to Pahuera, as a very important, not just us as Māori, as us as iwi, hapu, and our recognition to the settlement acts that we can act upon. So it's a very sensitive issue to hapu iwi, and I expect information flow of this with any legal people that are doing it to be transparent right through the council. As we already advised, we have our own legal guys to do this work too. So, kia ora.
You did mention the seismic survey issue and whether it should be extended to that. I would like that because over the last month we have reports of dead fish being washed up on beaches all along the coast, even crayfish walking erratically up by Wairo on the sand. And I think Councillor Wilson has probably been collecting them. So, so yeah, we don't know the full impact of this seismic survey. So yeah, I'd like that extended to that. Okay, so someone move the report be accepted, please. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Sorry, just one more part. James,
Generally,
please.
I think you only allowed one question, but never mind.
Oh, yeah? Oh, I don't know, mate. I don't know, mate. Just with regard to the March meeting, is there an intention for the RPC to give the yay or nay at that meeting?
It'll depend somewhat on the nature of the legal advice, I suspect. We'll certainly be seeking a decision in terms of proceeding to the next phase of work. The council won't be in a position to actually decide whether to notify a plan change until it's undertaken statutory consultation. You've received the cost-benefit analysis that has to be done under Section 32 of the RMA. There is consultation with ministers, Crown agencies required by law, etc. So there's a range of steps that we need to take, but there will be decision points along the way that we'll keep checking in with you on, and we'll continue to seek your guidance about how to focus this plan change. So that's a long-winded answer. Short answer is that yes, there'll be some decisions to take on the 1st of March.
Okay, can someone move the recommendation we received, please? Councillor Belford, second. Councillor Bailey. All in favour? Thank you. Heretaunga Plains Urban Development Strategy.
Chair, did you want to check that
Kia ora,
Tony is
Tanya.
hearing us?
Kia ora,
Can you hear?
Hello everyone.
Yep.
Okay.
We are on item 9.
Okay, so item 9. 2 reasons for this report. First is to provide a recap of the Heretaunga Plains Urban Development Strategy, or HPUDS, which was adopted by 3 councils back in 2010. 3 councils were Napier City, Hastings District and the Hawke's Bay Regional Councils. Second purpose is to provide an update on the review of that HPUDS document that was being worked through during the 2016 calendar year and being overseen by a joint council implementation working group. So, without dwelling too much on what HPUDS was about, it was certainly trying to pull together a number of, certainly Napier and Hastings had their pre-existing urban development strategies. This, in 2010, brought that together in one place and attempted to map out how urban development, not just residential but commercial and industrial business land needs, could be accommodated over the next 30-year planning period. But in doing so, it was always recognised that it needed to adapt to changing conditions, changing market forces, and that's when there was always this expectation that there would be a 5-yearly kind of review being undertaken. A number of the paragraphs in my paper set out what the vision of HPUDS was, what the underlying principles of HPUDS 2010 were. They still remain intact. The 2016 review didn't tinker with any of those principles or visions. The working group felt that they were still sound and relevant, didn't see a need to throw the baby out with the bathwater. In implementing the principles and trying to achieve the vision, HPUD's 2010 version strive to achieve a compact urban development form. It's not absolutely ring fencing the Napier Hastings and Havelock North kind of urban fringes as we know it today, but trying to maintain a somewhat compact development form with some infill intensification within those areas, but also some greenfield growth areas on the fringes as well. Not necessarily greenfield growth areas on the highly productive soils. Those are well valued and well known. We don't want to lay concrete willy-nilly on those productive soils. The working group has, well, when the strategy was adopted in 2010, there were over 140 individual actions outlined in that strategy for one or other agencies to follow through on. So for the last 4 or 5 years or so, a joint council implementation working group was established to oversee some of those actions being done. Not all of those actions had the same degree of priority. Some of them have already been completed, and for our part, certainly one of the key projects or key actions that emerged from the original strategy was changing our regional policy statement to embed many of the key principles and directives that emerged from HPUDS into the regional policy statement. That was known as Change 4 to the regional policy statement, and that change is already operative and in place already. Hastings and Napier is still subsequently following through, changing their respective district plans over time. If we turn to just the update on the 2016 review, this commentary in my paper starts at paragraph 15. The review was undertaken in 3 distinct phases. First phase was a stocktake. basically what's changed in the last 5 years since HPUDs was adopted in terms of our projections for population growth, projections for demand. Have we come across any new information that, or new assumptions that might have altered our thinking from what it was in 2010, such as do we know anything more about anything better about natural hazards in our region? So that was a bit of a stock take, and given that stock take, the working group felt that we didn't need to throw baby out with the bathwater. There was a clearly defined scope and some further pieces of work that were commissioned as part of stage 2 that looked at a handful of key issues or key themes. One around rural residential supply, one around retirement housing or housing for the elderly, and a few other things around what happens, or what could happen in particular in around the Havelock area, given issues with tomato mushrooms odour impacting on prospective development at Heretaunga. Those reports then informed draft amendments to the strategy, and stage 3 saw a draft version of the strategy going out for public comment, public submissions. We received over 50 submissions, written submissions, and in October the working group heard presentations from a number of those submitted, and in the last wee while the working group has been going through its recommendations as to how it might accommodate some of the requests that were made in those submissions. In the not too distant future, those recommendations will be finalised. A recommended revised Heretaunga Plains Urban Development Strategy will be put to this council and also Napier and Hastings Council for their adoption. But that's not the end of the story. Beyond that adoption of the revised strategy, there will be the need to still have the 3 councils overseeing implementation of the actions in that new strategy. What else was I going to say? Yeah, so it's just this paper is sort of a recap, an update, and foreshadowing that this council will be in receipt of the working group's recommendations in the not too distant future. Happy to take any questions or clarification around any of that.
Mr. Chair, Gavin, I wonder whether you can just summarise the Regional Council's position, representation, submissions in regard to cumulative effects of intense urbanisation and what's the term that's used? Just going back to it here. Just wanting a sense of what we had to say about a compact urban environment, urban form, particularly in relation to the Napier City Council's developments at Parklands and at Te Aroa Ave, etc., in terms of stormwater discharge and other effects on those estuarine environments.
So in terms of the 2 examples that you've mentioned, Parklands and Te Aroa, those 2 areas were areas previously identified in the Napier Urban Growth Strategy. So HPUDs kind of just folded those areas into the 2010 version of the strategy without significantly shifting the goalposts on it. As far as the regional council's position on those 2 areas go, for compactness, is that you sort of inferring, or
Go back to the question of the term here is move towards more compact urban form, and the outcome of that has been very intense urbanisation, close planting of houses in the likes of parklands with a very substantial environmental effect. What did we have to say about that? Did we say that was a good idea, or did we recognise the impacts that compact form was having on the Ahuriri estuary? What did we say?
In terms of parklands, that area was rezoned in about the mid 2000s, if not earlier, whereas Te Awa was more of a late developer. The rezonings and subdivision processes that have gone on through there, I know we have made submissions as and when opportunity has arisen to highlight Te Awa's risk and vulnerability as far as inundation and flood control measures go. But about the compact form of that development, I don't think we've expressed any firm view, other than it's perhaps assuming that it's consistent with the overall HPUD's strategy.
Mr. Chair, if I could just pursue this a little bit further. I'm really trying to get at the point, Gavin, that we've got a review of the HPUD's strategy, and it was to consider, I think in your words, what do we know now, and insert that into the review. Is that what the review was seeking to do, was to look at any new information we've got, any views that may have formed in the 6-year period since the HPUD introduction in 2010? So I'm really keen to know what we had to say, whether we had a comment on the impacts of compact house planting in that part of the world.
Can I perhaps answer that through you, Mr. Chair? The both the rezoning of parklands and the area Te Awa, the minimum section sizes were certainly significantly above the minimum recommendation in HPUDs. So in terms of their compactness, that really probably isn't the type of example that we're looking to try and, if you like, capture by HPUD. So they're largely single dwellings on medium-sized lots. So they're not any different to most other suburban sections in Napier and Hastings.
Excuse, Mr. Chair, if I could just continue a little, perhaps backing off the physical size of the section and contemplate the impact of urban development in association with a very sensitive environment, and whether we had anything to say about that in the review.
I'm not sure about in the review, and I'll get Gavin to answer that, but certainly going back to when the original rezoning was done for each of those areas, given their respective locations, one of the key assessments that we would have looked at was stormwater quality. Gavin sort of talked about stormwater quantity, particularly in relation to Te Awa and where it lies, and we certainly had some concerns about that and expressed those through our statutory advocacy role. But in terms of stormwater quality, clearly that's another significant area of concern for us. And I have to say that in some ways, those developments have been able to, if you like, meet the most recent best practice in terms of stormwater quality discharge, because they're planned developments. We've got a better understanding of how to manage stormwater discharges, so they're probably in some ways better for in terms of their stormwater quality than existing areas.
Mr. Chairman, I think. Yeah, thank you, Chair. Look, this is an area that greatly bothers me because if we get our future planning of urban development wrong, we're going to destroy the most important asset base for this region, which is the land in particular that surrounds Hastings. And despite what you said about HPUDs aiming to avoid taking land in prime agricultural areas, the most recent attempt on the part of Hastings to expand its boundaries involves the area between Hastings Havelock Road and Howard Street, and that's prime agricultural land. So I don't see any evidence that Hastings is doing what HPUDs asks it to do. And what concerns me just as much is that Hastings District Council took 96 hectares of land in the Lyndhurst area 20-something years ago, and it's only got 255 houses on it, and it should have more than 1,000, because 96 hectares is a huge amount of land, and I don't see any justification for them even taking Howard Street at all. Hastings needs to expand by developing the land along the edge of the hills at the back of Havelock along Middle Road, because that's not valuable land. But it continues to do the same thing, and in my lifetime, Hastings, by expanding its boundaries, 5 hectares here, 10 hectares there, has taken 2,000 hectares of land and put it in houses. There are 26,000 hectares of good land on the Heretaunga Plains, and in my lifetime I've seen 10% of it squandered because Hastings has continued to do this. And it cannot continue, and we need to take a very strong stance on this, and I see no evidence that we're doing it. So when we look at the aims of HPUDs, which is 60% intensification of existing urban areas, 35% greenfields, which I don't think is acceptable, but 35% greenfields, and 5% rural, I'm 100% sure that's not what's happening, and I have no idea why we're allowing 2045 as the target to achieve those ends. Why are we giving another 30 years of greenfield developments around Hastings and Napier to achieve that target? What the hell is wrong with us? We need to take a stance on this. I just feel really strongly about it.
Thank you, Paul, for the microphone.
I do have a question. I'd like to know who our 2 representatives are on the HPUDs committee.
And I'm the other.
My question...
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to know...
Might I give a question? Thank you. My question is, and I just need to back... I agree with everything that Peter Bevan has said there, and my question is, what is the current thinking within HBUDs, given the extreme pressure housing and developments being put on in Napier and Hastings to deal with this with some degree of immediacy? Because it's leaving me with the impression they've got this long-term fuzzy thing happening here, and then we have Reds, which is saying we need 1,000 extra jobs. I think there'll be 5,000 extra jobs created. We've got housing pressures in the area. What are we doing to accommodate the new people who are going to move to Napier and Hastings in the area for these jobs? This is a big problem we've got today, and it seems to me that we're looking at is fuzzy plans which are decades away when the problem is here and now. So what is HBUDs up for coping with this? Do we have a decent plan or not?
Mr. Chairman, I'll attempt to answer it. And I'll go back to basics. HPUDs is a breakthrough in urban planning in Hawke's Bay. It basically contains and puts a fence, albeit a fence that is subject to some variation in places over time as conditions change, to contain urban development into a compact form and encourage intensification. Now, the process itself has been very successful. Plan Change 4 is probably the plan change that has been able to be incorporated in our books in the minimum amount of time, and that was because the process was a very sound one. In the first instance, there there were position papers put out and submissions invited, and from memory there were over 100 submissions. I can't recall a submission from Councillor Bevan. There may well have been one from the fruit growers, I'm sure there was. And in the second review, another 40 or 50 submissions. So it's been public, open, accountable, and if people don't understand what's been going on, it's because they haven't taken enough interest, to be honest. And I'd just like to go a little step further in terms of Councillor Curtin's concerns about estuarine pollution from urban development. Tiawa does not discharge into an estuarine environment. It goes into the overland drain straight to out to a coastal marine environment. And that overland drain as well picked up a lot of the drainage systems that earlier went into the estuary. And so parklands, sure, goes into the estuary, and that's got to be watched fairly carefully. But look, this in my mind has been a very professional and accomplished process, and it's got a very good result. Nothing's perfect, and planning will have to change and be adapted as situations change, just as in terms of Heretaunga, where reverse sensitivity issues arising from the mushroom farm had to force the abandonment of urban development there and put it in another area. But the reality is, Mr. Chairman, that in planning for urban development, you've got to find space for sheep, you've got to find space for apples, but you've also got to find space for people.
It's a little bit hard to speak after Councillor Dick and Councillor Bevan. I'd just like to say thank you, Alan, for your summary, and Peter, for yours. I hear what you're saying, and I really enjoyed your questions. I'm wondering. I'm back on Peter's topic. What sort of teeth does this have? Because I look at the development across the sports park as an example, a huge development there, and I'm just wondering what sort of teeth are we wasting our time when you see we're doing this and these great big developments go up, and I really sympathise with Peter's sentiments. So I'm interested in how effective we are.
So the Heretaunga Plains Urban Development Strategy is a non-statutory document, but as Gavin outlined earlier, the first version of this, the initial 2010 version, progressed into Plan Change 4, which is a change to our regional policy statement, which set out the areas that have been identified for priority areas for urban development. So any changes to the as a result of this review would also then be progressed through to a statutory document, in other words, our regional policy statement. I guess the question then becomes if there are developments that are outside of that, how far do we pursue that in a judicial sense?
Thank you, Chair. I think Ms Lambert's stolen my thunder there. I think the point I wanted to make is the HPUD's review, and I chaired it, was not about challenging existing zoning, etc. It wasn't. It did look at an attempt for some rezoning of land. I'll ask Gavin perhaps to comment on that, which we decided was not part of the scope of the review. The review was relatively low key, and existing zoning and existing The points raised by Councillor Curtin and Councillor Bevan are very valid, but the tools of HPUDs didn't have the teeth to deal with that. So I do, though, think that when we come to adopt the results of that small hearing, we can make our points loud and clear then to respective councils that there are some challenges, some 2017 challenges that perhaps weren't considered when the zoning was done in the early days. So I guess the point I wanted to make is the hearing's been done, the recommendations are going to come back, this council will have to get its head around that, and that's probably the time to make these points, ram them home. But the particular process we're talking about here was never envisaged to challenge existing zoning, etc.
I note in the guiding principles that you have mana whenua aspirations and concerns there, and I also note that on your committee or working group there are 2 mana whenua representatives. However, as the regional council, as the regional planning committee for the regional council, I just want to ensure that those aspirations and concerns are protected. In particular, the effect of urban development on papakainga. There are several papakainga that are slowly being encroached by urban development. That's the more traditional type, and then in the more contemporary one is that there's a new type of papakainga that's now in action, where a group, be it a hapu or a treaty group, designates some land for their people for housing, and then with working with the Crown, Te Puni Kōkiri and that, they get the finance to put that together. There's 2 in existence that I'm aware of, one in Waipatu and one at just across the bridge, Ngāti Pāro, there, and that almost seems to be separate from any notion of the development, of the urban development. So I guess my point is that our representatives ensure that those concerns and aspirations are protected, given from the membership here, from the treaty membership here, because they might be different from the 2 representatives who sit on the working group.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Roger, for that. And I'd just like to elaborate what Roger's saying about the HBUD strategy. We understand mana whenua and values and aspirations, but we're talking about a development strategy. They ain't development strategies when we look at it as tikanga Māori. And why I say that is, where is the room within this strategy with treaty settlements that are settled in this area to develop under this urban plan? I don't see much in that for Māori, as they will expand themselves over time. If it's commercial, residential, so be it. But we have a RAD strategy that's looming over this area here, and I don't see this providing any of that inside that strategy of Māori commercial development moving into the future. Kia ora.
Sorry I was late, Chair, and I missed the meeting. I was very keen on this, missed this particular address. Sorry I missed Peter's because I just caught the end of Debbie's retort. That was Peter's old orchard that went under that winery. And many of us think that should never have happened. So we need to look at this fertile land that we've got, because if you go up and stand on top of Tomato Peak, which I've been doing because I've had some guests lately, and look down, you are seeing a sea of red. It's quite an interesting thing, because you've got the brown hills and you've got the irrigated green, but there is also a sea of concrete. And we have got to stop the concrete going on our class 14, 15, 6A, 5A soils, because that underpins our economy in Heretaunga. And I'm not sure about the wider conversation, but I understand HBUDS is mostly to do with Heretaunga, and we need to protect those soils as Tonga. And I would like to, I've had a meeting with Gavin and discussed it with him and discussed our lack of teeth. We need to get some teeth, and if we have to use the public forum to get teeth, then that's what we have to do. But we should never have jumped the fence, that particular fence from the sports park across for a winery there on that class beautiful land. You will never get that land back. And there's plenty of places in Heretaunga to put wineries and industrial developments and all sorts of things, and without going on our soils, which are rated as the best in the world. So the other thing I'd like Gavin to do for us, so what I'd like to do is create a map of what are the precious pieces of soil that we need to protect at all costs, and publicise that map so that everyone in Heretaunga can see that we know this is precious and we're not going across that road, or we're not going to that bit. Now, and I'd also like Gavin to share where Hastings and Napier are going over the next decade, because I've had the luxury of seeing that, and mostly it has been quite sensible to small titles, good land, but small titles which you can't do much with. It's those big chunks of land, 20 acres and up, that we need to protect for the future. And we just have to fight for this. We have to fight for it.
Before I refer to the next one, question, given what has happened in Christchurch, and given what we've seen on TV in terms of what went on in Tokyo with the earthquakes and all that sort of thing, to what extent is ethical issues come into this in terms of us allowing people to build houses on high liquefaction areas and high tsunami risk areas?
Good question.
The Regional Council is probably the lead agency in Hawke's Bay in terms of hazard research, and we've got a continuous program of enhancing that knowledge. On the go at the moment is some further work around liquefaction. That's still to be completed, but it's emerging, and I would expect that new information, when it's finalised, will certainly inform the next 5-year review of HPUDs. In the meantime, it would certainly inform any prospective developers who would be doing their due diligence about their own developments, subdivisions, rezoning proposals and whatnot.
And you go down to Christchurch and you've cleared whole areas of urban areas because of the liquefaction area, and so I think we've got to factor all that stuff in here. But Councillor Belford.
Yes, Mr. Chair, through you, a question maybe to Liz. So could you clarify what is the point of intervention? When a proposal comes along like the delegates plant out at the expressway there, I would take it that there are sufficient environmental effects associated with that we would be, it would normally be within our ambit to submit or comment or engage the council around that. Would we have done that in this instance, or what is the process for determining when we deem it serious enough to intervene?
Thank you, Councillor. I think there's probably two opportunities to do that, and one is, some of the cases that would have come through the HPUD's review and plan change 4, which is actual rezoning by the district councils of their district plans for, let's say, going from primary sector use to residential, as an example. So that would give us an opportunity to provide a comprehensive submission on, and obviously whether or not we support what the proposal is and why, or why not, and what mitigation measures we would seek. The other one, as in the case of the delegates' winery, now I'm not across all the details of this particular one, and I'm going to look over here. Gavin may recall it or not. But because both primary use and production, post-production, permitted activities in those zones, I would expect that outside of its bulk and location measures, that was probably a permitted activity in that zone. So that would have a much reduced under the Hastings District Plan. So that would give us far fewer opportunities to actually comment on it. It wasn't notified.
I'm happy to move the recommendation, Mr. Chair. Yes, I do, Mr. Chair. In looking at this issue and raising, as I did earlier, the contribution the Regional Council has made in the HPUD's process, it occurs to me that we may have in fact put ourselves in a position where we become a bystander in terms of the environmental effects that the HPUD strategy has actually had. I'm not suggesting we're in a position to challenge or to deter, well, perhaps not, but at least to challenge the local authorities' subdivision and intensity plans. But what I'm saying is, in the process of the Regional Council's participation in the HPUD's process, we seem to have remained silent while, there's no other term to describe it, environmental vandalism was being enacted right in front of our eyes. And you only need to look at the results of the latest report from the Ahuriri estuary as demonstrative proof that that's taken place. And I use for the example where the Napier City Council used the HPUD's process and its own planning process as the largest property developer in Hawke's Bay, probably one of the largest in New Zealand, taking very little regard to the environmental effects that its subdivision in, for example, Parklands has produced on the environment. What we've got is something like currently, and many more to come, 1,700 odd houses, zinc coming off the roof. We've got people fertilising their lawns, putting sprays on their roses. The rain comes, as it has, flushing straight into the estuary. We've got Te Awa, and I hear Councillor Dick give an explanation of the effects on that. We've got now the same effect, flushing the equivalent. I would suggest it would have been more environmentally safe to have put a nuclear power plant in Te Awa, or to have relocated the Dow chemical plant to Te Awa, than to do what we're currently doing. We flush straight into the coastal marine environment on a daily basis. We pump it out to that environment. So what we've got is the Regional Council, a meek, silent, and silent, when I say silent because I can't see evidence that we said anything in the review about the environmental effects. We said nothing, really. And as a result, we become impotent, silent, and we get the two-finger salute that we get from the Hastings District Council and Napier City Council when we come to their consent. So what we've got, Mr. Chair, is once again this council sitting silently on the sideline while this damage is taking place, when we could have said stuff and we haven't.
Thank you, Chair. It's a pretty hard act to follow. I think the only thing I'd add is I have a solution for all this. Let's protect the plains. Let's cut out this environmental vandalism, and everyone can come to Wairoa.
Thank you, Chair. I think that the use of the term environmental vandalism by Councillor Curtin, although he was using it in relation to the Ahuriri estuary, I think it can be equally applied to the matter that I'm concerned about, and I hear the concerns expressed by a number of other people sitting around this table, which is the taking by stealth of so much of our high quality soils, and we have to think about growing up, not out, because that's the solution for intensification of our urban framework that we need for the future. In response to Councillor Dick's comments about did I submit, did I not submit, there's more than one way, Councillor Dick, to influence these processes, and I spent most of yesterday on a bus with the Mayor of Hastings and half of his councillors driving around the areas of concern and pointing out the land that's already been earmarked for subdivision and pointing out that there's no need to take areas like Howard Street in the future. There's plenty of other land that's available. So this is an area of ongoing concern for the people sitting around this table. I think we've been incredibly weak-kneed up until now, and we need to make our voice much more strongly heard for the future.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with most what's been said, except this. This HBRC group is a seriously good group. And people have done, such as Gavin, have done really seriously good work. And all they can do is put the work in front of us. If anyone's not taking this to the public, it's our job. That's our job as governors. And if there's been any weak need here, it's us. We have to stand up as governors, as councillors for regional council, and stand up for what is right and start speaking out and take on these expansionists that are going onto our soils, and I take on Toro's going onto soils that perhaps aren't suitable to go on in the long term, and we have to speak out. It's up to us to speak out, not our staff.
I think you'll get more logical debate on this matter when the reviewed plan is brought back to this council and to the Napier and Hastings in its full form for everyone to study in detail and to understand, comprehend, and make some comments then. I'd also like to make the offer that I'm prepared to take my weak knees off the working group and give over to these flag-waving stalwarts down the other end, whoever may wish to take on the task, and then take some responsibility for the end results.
Work plan.